Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The first meeting between senior American and Iranian officials in Muscat, Oman on Saturday was deemed a positive start by both parties. They managed to have both indirect talks through their Omani host and a short direct encounter outside their separate rooms. Opening positions were presented and are being analyzed ahead of a second meeting. This seemingly bodes well for diplomacy. However, there is no assurance that a deal can be reached before President Donald Trump's early June deadline for resolving the nuclear project standoff. What are the chances for the commander in chief and the supreme leader in Tehran to avoid an all out conflagration? Joining us to dissect this matter, all the way from the United States, is Professor Russell Berman, who formerly served as a senior advisor on the U.S. State Department's policy planning staff, currently the director of the Middle East and Islamic World Working Group at Hoover Institution at Stanford University. It's a pleasure to have you with us, sir.
Happy to be here, Jonathan.
Always a pleasure indeed. Also joining us from elsewhere here in Israel is Brigadier General in Reserve Oren, formerly the IDF's Chief of Cyber Staff and Israel Air Force Commander and a fighter pilot. It's good to see you as well, General.
Good to see you, Jonathan.
And last but not least, our TV7 Editor-at-Large, Mr. Oren. Amir, set the stage for us.
So President Trump is impatient in an either-or mode. Either he gets a deal, he mentioned 2 months as the deadline. Obviously, that can be more flexible, but the direction must be seen by June. Or he will authorize a military strike. Now, this time frame is very demanding. If you go back more than 20 years ago, the E3, Germany, France, and Great Britain, which was an European at the time, part of the EU, they started the negotiations. The US joined a bit later in Oman, secretly, then it became public, and only in 2015 was the agreement reached. And it wasn't bilateral US-Iran, but it had 7 parties to it. Apparently, President Trump doesn't want to share the negotiations with others, China, Russia, or the Europeans. So it's a very, very hectic schedule. And Presidential Envoy Stephen Witkoff has other files as his charge. But if there is a will, there will be a way.
Absolutely. With regard to your British comment, it's still European. It might have more of an Asian color these days, but nonetheless, the British Isle is part of Europe, irrespective of the institutions that govern some of those countries. Professor Berman, I'd like to hear your take from an American perspective on the latest round of negotiations.
Well, obviously, President Trump has put the Iran file front and center among his many foreign policy concerns. Witkoff has a busy schedule with Ukraine as well on his plate. I think that a notable feature is precisely this absence of the Europeans, which says a lot about President Trump's estimation of the capacity of the Europeans, with or without the United Kingdom, to play a significant role in this and really other aspects of international security at this point.
Very interesting indeed. General Rosen, while those negotiations are ongoing, slower than what President Trump would have wanted, and he has been vocal about that. Nonetheless, we do see a lot of military assets still en route into the Middle East, preparing for what may turn into a kinetic response.
Yeah, I think all the players in this chess game sort of understand very clearly what's going on. Trump isn't bluffing. Air power speaks much louder than policy papers. So air power and aircraft carriers are in place. And so the smoking gun is there. Now, at the same time, there's a big question. Should there be a stick and then the carrot, or should we just use the carrot, which is the negotiations? I'm not sure what United States wants. I'm sure the United States wants this to work without, almost sure that the United States wants this to work without having to employ power, military power. But I'm also almost, in my understanding, I think everyone understands that the Iranians will try to avoid anything they can in order not to sort of play by Trump's President Trump's rules. So we may reach the point of use of power, and then the question is, how much power do we do? Stick and then a carrot. So then you enter the negotiations with the gun, not only smoking, shooting, and then again on the table, hey, we're not bluffing. We can go further. You are completely exposed. That's one option. And we also have to consider the Israeli option. Israel is also in a very sort of weird situation here, because if there's an agreement that is not good for Israel, let's say some kind of JCPOA, which is not good for the long term for Israel, Israel can sort of act alone, but it wouldn't act alone without the president's approval. So is Israel going to be sort of doing this without asking, and then sort of playing into the hands of the United States as the stick? Or is it going to do it without connection to the carrot and the stick? I think humbly that Israel will not be able to operate without consent, very clear consent from the United States for various operational and strategic issues. I don't think Prime Minister Netanyahu can afford it. I think everyone saw I would almost say the freak show with the president of Ukraine, and no one wants to be in that position. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu was very, very careful when he was sitting next to President Trump, and being very smart on how he acts there and how he where he says what he agrees on and not agreeing on with the president. So a clear and very straightforward coercive campaign. The smoking gun is on the table. And now let's see if it's a carrot without a stick without a carrot, or with a carrot.
Thank you, General Rosen. Mr. Oren, there are concerns, as General Rosen mentioned, from Israel, from other countries in the region, about the prospects not only for a kinetic strike, but also for a bad deal, so to speak, a repackaged Obama JCPOA, as President Obama at the time called it. A bad deal is better than no deal at all, but nonetheless, there are ongoing negotiations, and this is just the beginning of a possibly short runway.
So your real question is regarding President Trump. Is he a leader or a dealer? We will find out soon enough. Now, for Israel...
Can't leaders be dealers?
Yes, if they are the masters of the deal, of course. Now, for Israel, the dilemma is contrary to the way they behaved, Netanyahu personally, when Obama was in charge. And Israel decided not to take part even behind the scenes in the staff work towards the JCPOA, and therefore had no say when it was finalized. Here, Israel, especially since it is now part of CENTCOM, can have some input and therefore some impact. But the downside is that by doing so, it is signing on whatever the American negotiators get out of it. Now, two topics are not on the table, but they are in the back of everyone's minds. For the Iranians, it's regime survival. Of course, they are not going to talk about it with foreigners. For the Americans, it's Trump's wish to get a foreign policy success. So there is some common ground, and a deal is possible, especially if it's in stages, gradual, not a final act, but if both sides decide that they are going to improve relations, commercial relations too. President Trump keeps pointing that Iran can prosper. He wants Iran to help American manufacturers by ordering American goods. So if I had to venture a bet, they will succeed.
Well, time will tell. Professor Berman, your observations and responses to our two fellows here.
Okay, on the question of a bad deal, let's fast forward and imagine that the deal has been made. It's going to be a gray zone. I think there are some voices for whom anything short of an American direct military attack on Iranian sites will be a bad deal. That's probably an extreme position, but any deal is therefore going to be criticized. I do believe that President Trump is disinclined to use military force. He is inclined to find diplomatic resolutions. I think we should look at his aspirations in Ukraine as a framework to think about his aspirations in Iran. He wants to present himself as the peacemaker in the world, in Ukraine and with regard to Iran. On the other hand, he does not want to have solutions that are regarded as capitulations. In Ukraine, if he comes up with a solution that leads to a Russian takeover, this will be his Afghanistan. If he comes up with a bad solution in Iran, with regard to Iran, it will be JCPOA. And in both cases, he'll be vulnerable to very aggressive political criticism. Therefore, my sense is that he'd prefer not to use military force, but he wants to have a very good deal for the U.S. and for Israel.
General Rosen?
I think it's maybe time to talk about the Libyan model for a second. I think that back in 2003, I think the Libyan model, if I'm correct, I think that this is where the administration is pushing to. Libya didn't negotiate. Tripoli literally capitulated. And that's the model that President Trump, I think, would really want from these discussions. It's about compliance. You give it all up, and maybe we talk. Right now, the big question is, how do you frame it in a way that provides some kind of ladder to a leader, such as the leaders, the mullahs in Iran? That's the tension. That's the complexity of Libyan model 2025. Okay, now Iran doesn't have a lot of leverage. They have the Houthis are exposed, under attack. The rest of their axis is under attack and very, very weakened. Their defenses, air defenses, and everything is in the lowest point. So for the United States, this is the best point to push towards something like that. And so you have military deterrence on display. You have the diplomatic ambiguity. You have the economic sort of strangulation pushing to the internal collapse, and you have the snapback deadline in October, which is cornering everyone, including Europe. So I think this is where President Trump would like to push to, and days will tell, I guess.
Well, Mr. Owen, I'd like to hear your take on that as well. But beyond that, we're seeing that the Islamic Republic of Iran is seemingly very stressed about all kind of aspects that don't necessarily have to do with the nuclear deal. The domestic situation of Iran is growing harder and harder. And we're seeing that the economy there is failing, with all-time lows reported on a near weekly basis. We're seeing tensions vis-a-vis Pakistan and tensions vis-a-vis Afghanistan. We're looking at the relations between Iran and Russia, which seemingly on paper look great, but there are converging interests that may not be the same in the very near future. So it has a lot to lose beyond what it already lost. Where can we leverage that from an American perspective and from a European perspective at that?
You can leverage it in order to get a better deal, but they are not as desperate. They are down, but not desperate. They don't have their back to the wall yet, and therefore one shouldn't count just because what you said is true, and the population suffers. This does not mean that the regime fears extinction right now. And
we're talking about more than 16 strategic bombers with time on target of less than an hour.
Yes,
on the various targets that presumably in an attack would be targeted. They're not desperate in that context?
No, they're not desperate because they don't believe that the U.S. Has reassured its Gulf allies that they will not be hit by Iranian retaliation. Of course, it's a game of chicken. Maybe they will not be able to do it. Maybe the U.S. will cripple the entire Iranian system, missiles, as well as the various aircraft that they still have. But there is one important factor which distinguishes between what happened over the last 4 years and the present. When Biden tried to lure the Iranians into a renewed JCPOA or a version of it, they said, yes, but what if Trump comes back? And lo and behold, he did. But Trump doesn't have a Trump at his flank. If Trump signs a deal with Khamenei, it's going to hold. There will be no one in the States. Yes, there will be criticism, but no one is going, the next president or whoever is not going to break the Trump deal. So the Iranians will rest assured that this will hold.
Never say never is a statement I heard from some distinguished person sitting next to me once tell me.
Yeah, but one has to make a decision. Right. Just based on never say never will not get you anywhere.
Indeed. Professor Berman, I'd like to hear, this might be somewhat a peculiar question, but is President Trump afraid of his own success in the event that he would launch a kinetic strike and potentially eradicate, according to experts in a number of fields related to Iran's nuclear proliferation? Such a strike would delay Iran's nuclear aspirations by at least 5 years in the worst case scenario. But let's just take a scenario in which this would indeed topple the Ayatollah regime. What is a day after?
As in previous conflicts in the Middle East, I'm not sure that the United States has a plan for the day after. On the other hand, I don't think that President Trump is afraid. That may not be an advantage, but I don't see him radiating anxiety regarding his Iran policy. I believe that he is in a very strong negotiating position via Witkoff, of course, with the Iranians for the reason that Mr. Owen just referenced. If there's an agreement now, President Trump can offer a treaty that would be Senate ratified, and that would have a durability that these executive orders do not. I mean, Lord only knows, I think the Iranians are at a point where they should face reality and effectively give up on this in return for something like a recognition of Washington of the regime and Iranian national sovereignty. Uh, this is a point where Iran could pull back from regional destabilization and really return to a proximity to the United States in international affairs the way prevailed in Iranian foreign policy before 1979. Uh, the regime in Tehran does not have many cards to play at this point. If it wants to survive, this is the time for it to it to make a deal.
How do you play cards in a chess game?
Good question. I only play chess. I don't play cards, so that's a different story. But General Hosen, I'd like to ask you specifically on the European angle, since you mentioned earlier the fact that the snapback mechanism under UN Security Council Resolution 2231 is set to expire by October 18th. In order to trigger this mechanism, the Europeans, or E3 specifically, Britain, Germany, and France, will have the capacity to do so by, let's say, July at the latest, in order to push for such a mechanism to be triggered in time. Do you see them leveraging that in a certain context vis-a-vis the United States to gain the seat at the table, or is that too soon to tell?
It's a good question. I'm not sure the snapback mechanism is more than a pressure point at this point. First of all, some would argue that because the United States stepped out of the JCPOA, the snapback, what's the snapback if you're not in the mechanism? So that's a first question I would put here on the table.
It's very stringent political sanctions that the Iranians are very fearful of.
Yeah, what it is, we all know, but I think that because the United States stepped out of it, some would argue that they can't put this mechanism back because they stepped out of it and it's null, or whatever you want to call it. But let's assume it is a window, and I think that is the biggest value of the snapback mechanism. It's sort of it's something in the near future, not too far away, not too close, leaves enough time for negotiations. And I think with everything discussed here, I think the biggest question would be, is it a carrot and a stick? Is it a carrot? Is a carrot negotiable right now with the Iranian mullahs? That's the first thing I would ask. My hunch is that he is not ready to capitulate without seeing a stick. And then the question is, from the United States position, what kind of stick? Do you go all the way if they don't go with you? Or do you do something an escalated campaign and say, look, this was just to show you what we mean, and we mean business. Now, do you want to go back to the table? I think that's part of the discussion because of the implications of a all out attack on the nuclear sites. And we all have to take into account that the ballistic missile capacity of Iran vis-a-vis the GCC states and the whole region, including U.S. assets and U.S. bases in the region, is one of the biggest things that we have to consider if we go for the stick and then the carrot, or the full stick or the partial stick. That's the thing. It has to be very, very measured. And again, the snapback, in my view, is part of the context, but it's not the biggest thing out there.
Absolutely. I will mention that this week we have IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi visiting the Islamic Republic of Iran for meetings with Salehi and other Iranian officials on Iran's nuclear file. They are holding various discussions with regard to also breaches of Iran under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, something that, of course, includes 3 open probes on nuclear materials that were located in undeclared sites, something that Iran is a signatory of as part as a signatory of the NPT, pledged it would not do, and other breaches that it responded time and again to various questions of the IAEA. And time and again, we heard Dr. Grossi coming out and stating, the Iranian response is not technically credible, meaning that it just doesn't make sense what they're saying, and this has now continued for the last several years. So maybe this will also be resolved as part of the American negotiations. Who knows? Closing sentence.
2 points. Trump is going to Saudi Arabia. The Saudi input will be important. Also, the American-Saudi civil nuclear deal. And we are trying to project the present into June, July, October. Maybe there will be a crisis which will concentrate people's minds and move us closer to a deal.
Indeed. And of course, let's not forget, Israel is also a big player here, with U.S. presidential envoy Steve Witkoff holding a discussion with Israeli strategic minister Ron Dermer on the various contents of the deal. They might not have received all of the details, or maybe yes, nobody knows, but except for those two actors, of course. But this is all the time that we have to deliberate this topic. So I'd like to thank Professor Berman, General Hussein, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Oren. I used to be Deputy National Security Advisor to the Government of Israel, currently Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, a think tank, and the editor of the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune. For the last few years, I've been a regular panelist for TV7, a fantastic opportunity to bring deep and analytical perspectives to the debate over regional affairs, Israeli affairs, international affairs, in the company of some of the best minds in Israel.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.